Hello everyone, I'm Rob Bos. I'm part of the core team for Global Devs Bootcamp. I wanted to talk to you about the things we did to provision everything we needed in Azure this year. The reason behind this is last year that we had participants create stuff in Azure and that took them a long time and some teams couldn't figure it out. So we wanted to set up the infrastructure that they need this year so they can get started easier with everything in there that they need. So for Azure, I did a lot of the provisioning stuff, and I wanted to talk to you through the steps that we did to get there. We're running the whole event inside of 4 different Azure subscriptions. And we split all the venues evenly over the subscriptions, so we have an even distributed set of resources that we need. And inside of each subscription, we've provisioned Active Directory users with the corresponding security groups. And we created resource groups for each team to use. So every team user that we created has owner rights on a resource group inside of one of the subscriptions that they land on. So we can deploy all the resources that they need in there. Fun part was getting a generic resource group set up for the resources that are needed across the whole venue. For instance, we ran into an issue where the SQL server that we need, you can only provision 20 SQL servers by default in a specific region. We're running worldwide for more than 90 venues, so we ran into those limits. So we decided to get a SQL server set up for the whole venue. And then all the teams have a database inside of that SQL server, so that way we can go around the limits that we hit there. So that was a nice finding, something we learned. This whole thing is generated from an Azure DevOps pipeline. And we created a little console application in .NET Core to generate this. So the pipeline kicks it off for a specific subscription and a specific region that we need to start, and then the whole pipeline Azure DevOps takes care of provisioning all the stuff that we need for a specific venue, and we kick it off from there. All the data that we generate, all the passwords and stuff that we need to have available on the day itself to use for the teams is stored in a separate SQL database, which we then can use to start off the challenges that you're doing this day. More than 90 venues, more than 1100 teams, so we need to have a repeatable way to actually run that stuff. Last year we did everything by hand, and that takes way too much time and makes it too easy to break. So step 1 is provision everything we need in Azure. So we talked about that already, and then step 2 is provision everything we need inside of Azure DevOps. We want to provide all the teams with Azure's DevOps project, with a repo that's pre-configured, ARM templates in there, then we can push an application for them so they actually have a working setup that they can use for the day. So step 1 is run the console application that provisions everything inside of Azure. And then step 2 is provision the whole setup for Azure DevOps. Those are set up by using a set of PowerShell scripts that we can kick off for a certain venue, for a certain region. And we're using, we have a big hammer that's Azure DevOps, so we're using Azure DevOps to provision all that stuff. That's basically the way, the default pipeline that's in there. So one is the Azure tooling, a set of PowerShell scripts that we're creating with the whole team, so we're versioning that inside of an Azure repo. So we use those as artifacts in the pipeline, and those will go into a first stage. We created a first stage with only a set of demo venues, so we can actually run the whole pipeline end to end for a set of demo venues, and we can test then if everything is set up correctly. So step 1 is run that only for the demo venues, and in, say, the week before that we actually start the event, we'll run it per region globally. Region 1. And we'll use the parallelism inside of the pipeline to run that for all the regions that we need. And then we'll scale that out so we can actually create a set of rings basically, and that we can do the provisioning for the whole world in one go. Splitting that up, running in parallel, saves us a lot of time, and it's a repeatable process that we can reuse whenever there is a change in something that we need, or we need to add an extra user or something like that. Okay, to summarize, the first step does all the things that we need inside of Azure. So that's creating the AAD users that we need, plus the groups that they're in. So we can actually give rights to a certain resource group based on the AAD group that they're in. We're creating a resource group for the team, one for generic stuff, for the venue that they're in, so the SQL Server that's is placed in there. We create a database per team, and then we have all the infrastructure set up inside of Azure. When that's done, we move over to Azure DevOps pipeline that will generate a new team project with in it a clone Git repo that they can use to start with the application that we need in there. So that's a web application. The ARM template that we're using is in there. We have a build pipeline in there, so we can actually kick off the build, get all the artifacts generated, and from that build we create a release. And the first time we actually run the release, so the release can actually provision all the stuff for the application itself inside of Azure. And then the team has a working Azure application up and running with everything set up. The application is, parts of the application are a .NET Core web application, a link to the SQL database that we provisioned, application insights is in there. So everything you need to have a working fake web shop up and running is in the release. And after those steps have run, we've actually provisioned the whole thing that you need to go through the challenges this day.